On the 26th of Jan 2026, I was a mum standing in a crowd when a bomb was thrown at the people around me. So I vividly recall that day, and it's haunted me pretty much ever since.
It's the other racism inquiry running at the same time as the Royal Commission into Antisemitism and Social Cohesion.
As we were watching the ceremony or the rally begin, I saw what appeared to be a child's toy out in front of me. It kind of wafted down. And I didn't know at the time that it actually had hit the leg of one of my daughter's friends. So I didn't know, obviously, that it was a sock-filled explosive device built for carnage. I didn't really know what I was seeing.
But while the Royal Commission has attracted rolling media coverage and government attention, the inquiry into racism, hate and violence directed at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people has been largely ignored, as witnesses shine a light on the repeated inaction before, during and after the alleged attempted bombing of an Invasion Day rally that triggered this inquiry.
But I'm here because of what happened next. Silence. Nothing. Nothing.
I'm Ruby Jones, and you're listening to 7am. Today, National Indigenous Affairs Editor for NITV and SBS, John Paul Janke, on how Australia treats different kinds of racism differently. It's Tuesday, July 21. JP, welcome to the show.
Great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Look, I was hoping that we could just start with the basics, why this inquiry was established and what it is that it's actually looking at.
Yeah, well, this is the Senate inquiry into racism and hate directed towards Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It really arises out of two incidents, and the main one being, of course, the January 26th Invasion Day rally in Boorloo, Perth, and the alleged attempted terrorist attack, so the throwing of a bomb into a crowd.
Police are alleging a 31-year-old man threw a homemade bomb into the crowd of thousands which had gathered in the heart of Perth CBD for the Invasion Day rally.
And then going back a couple of months before that, the attacks on Camp Sovereignty.
In Melbourne, demonstrators, including suspected neo-Nazis, stormed Camp Sovereignty, a First Nations gathering site in the Botanic Garden.
So those two incidents sparked the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Malarndirri McCarthy, to announce this Senate inquiry into racism and hate directed at First Nations people.
And so the very first hearings began in Perth, which is where, as you say, this alleged bombing attempt happened on January 26th. So what has the inquiry heard about the events of that day?
I think some really powerful testimony came from the National Indigenous Times and one of their reporters who was actually on the ground on the day and saw the incidents unfold. And I think she actually says in her testimony that the attempted explosive device bounced directly in front of her.
And I understand no one died. I get that. But that, by all intents, I shouldn't be sitting here and talking to you today. I and my girls and Mum and my sister, we should be dead because it landed right in front of us. That was the intent.
Protesters and those who had gathered for the Invasion Day rally had seen it as a terrorist attack. And so the evidence was really spelling out that the racism that was directed at First Nations people, particularly on the online platforms, has now moved into real-life harm. They understood that the police had been warned that there would be an attack, and I think they were scratching their heads saying, look, were the governments and various authorities actually paying enough attention before these attacks to what the Indigenous community of Perth was saying, that this had been escalating towards First Nations people for some time.
Tell me more about what we understand about warnings before the attack and how they were handled, as well as the response to what happened.
We heard from one of the organisers, Fabian Yaron, who said that organisers had received a warning that the rally would be the target of those in far-right groups.
I was organising this thing and we had tip-off from the community members that the Nazi party was going to come and haunt us on that day. So we was aware that the Nazis was going to be coming, and the Nazis was at Wellington Square, which is about 400 metres down the road.
He said that the police were informed but chose not to meet with organisers beforehand.
We told the police, we told our senators and told people that this is going to happen. But this time, the police didn't meet us. I didn't understand why they didn't meet us. I'm not sure why they didn't meet us.
He also said that organisers were not told about maybe a suspected bomb while they were in the square, while the square was being evacuated. And the National Indigenous Times journo, Renee Isaac Guthridge, she said that the community felt ignored and they believed that the incident overall was not treated as seriously as it should be because the targets were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So she spoke about that the WA police didn't really declare it an incident or a suspected terrorism attack till 9 days after the incident. And I think that was from political pressure. They also felt that mainstream media didn't emphasise the attack as a suspected terrorist attack and just chose it as an attack on an Invasion Day rally.
Given the Bondi attack only had happened so close to it, it was just such a stark comparison between how the response between the media and, you know, the naming of the individuals or the accused, you know, it came up straight away. Whereas you looked at what happened on that day, it was absolutely revolting, the comparison.
And so as the hearings continued, the evidence, the scope of it widened from this attempted attack in Perth to, as you've sort of said, the racism that people experience every day and the more kind of institutionalised racism that exists as well. So tell me more about what the inquiry's heard as it's continued on.
Yeah, so the inquiry moved from Perth to Darwin. It sat 2 days in Darwin, then moved on to Alice Springs on Friday last week. And we heard some really substantial evidence from the powerful Northern Land Council and their chair, Matthew Ryan, who said, you know, from his opening statement, he said, look, racism that is directed at Aboriginal people is every day and it's increasing.
I wish all of you come and experience what we experience every day. People are literally dying, crying out loud for help, whether it's health, education or housing. I grew up in one of them homelands. It was empowering back then because of ETSIC when we had the funding availability. It was so strong. Now we don't have that anymore.
And then we heard the CEO of the Northern Land Council, Yusuf Dean, talk about the impact of racism on the youth.
The hostility is constant and it is escalating. What concerns the NLC the most is the impact on our young people. When Aboriginal children see how their communities are talked about online, it damages their sense of identity and belonging. That harm is real and it is measurable.
We had others talk about, you know, failures in the NT justice system, and they called it, you know, a jailing machine. And he compared the prison system to those of a gulag.
Not only do we have the highest imprisonment rates in this jurisdiction, up to 90% of them are black. That is astonishing. That is unbelievable. That is intolerable. And yet I have watched in 20, 30, 40 years, I've watched it increase. And it's now going through the roof.
Others spoke about the examples of parents being fined, Aboriginal parents being fined over school attendance. So they spoke about structural racism that exists in both policy and in institutions. And this is off the back of what Ken Wyatt, who is the former Minister for Indigenous Australians, had said in Perth. And he said that, you know, racism is persistent, it's cumulative, it operates in education and healthcare, employment, it operates in our public spaces, it operates in our justice system.
So the greatest challenge is not just the attitude of individuals out in the field. It is our institutions across this nation. If you looked at the West Australian this morning, you would have seen a young Aboriginal man in an emergency department was grabbed and held by the throat, which I'm sure that they would not have done had it been the western suburbs of Perth. Because he happened to be an Aboriginal man in Kalgoorlie, he was treated and held by the throat and then eventually dropped to the floor. That is not what you'd expect in an institution in our nation.
But one of the things he spoke about is that his fear is that racism is going from those areas into in-person racism. So racism that is experienced on the street which is what we saw at the Invasion Day rally on January 26th earlier this year.
Coming up, how the Voice referendum became a turning point for racism. JP, a recurring theme in the evidence to this inquiry was that the Voice referendum marked a turning point in terms of racism becoming more openly expressed. What did people say changed during and after that campaign in 2023?
Yeah, a lot of the submissions that have been sent to the inquiry and posted online, there's some 670 submissions. A lot of those point to social media as the number one platform where that racism is escalating. And a lot of them are saying it's from the 2023 referendum. They say that racism was there during the referendum campaign, particularly through misinformation and mistruths about First Nations people. They've seen it continue, and they feel as though the referendum has given people permission to continue those levels of racism and continue those levels of misinformation all the way through to current times. The Northern Land Council spoke about posts that their children put up or their youth put up that are trolled right across Australia and, in fact, internationally through racist comments. We see it ourselves at NITV. We've had a huge escalation in the amount of trolling on our sites, and that comes at a cost to the organisation that we have to engage external moderators to look after our social media content.
And this inquiry, it's happening at the same time as the Royal Commission into Antisemitism. So what do you make of the way that it's been covered in the media compared to the Commission?
Yeah, I think there's been almost a silence from mainstream media on this inquiry when you compare it to the Royal Commission and the other inquiries into Islamophobia going on. Look, I think the inquiry is one thing and the agenda of public hearings is another thing, to hear people's evidence and stories firsthand. What people are saying is the time for action is now, that if you are serious in addressing the escalating racism that is directed towards First Nations people, the time for action is now. So people are putting forward a wide range of recommendations, some that are saying, look, we need more legislative clout. We actually need to make elements of racism illegal and actually enforce that through law. We need to make people accountable. We need to make the platforms accountable. We need to have greater education. So they're all hoping that this inquiry will lead to substantive change, not just another report that makes a series of recommendations that is not enacted, and we still continue to see this escalation of racism.
So do you think this inquiry will spur action?
Yeah, I think going through a lot of the recommendations that on the online submissions and hearing those who have given evidence in the public submission so far, a lot of people are saying that it's time for action now. So they're wanting this inquiry to actually deliver substantive change in addressing that racism directed at First Nations people. So they want to see some legislative reform. They want social media platforms to be held accountable for the racism that is escalating on their platforms. They want the ability for those racist comments to be taken down, deleted and removed. So they want real action, and they're hoping that the Senate inquiry doesn't just deliver another report, particularly when it comes to First Nations issue, that delivers a range of recommendations, and those recommendations are not implemented or not enacted over the coming years.
JP, thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thanks very much. Great to chat.
Also in the news, Barnaby Joyce has denied One Nation wants a return to the White Australia policy. During a podcast with far-right activist Tommy Robinson, Pauline Hanson blamed what she sees as Australia's problems with migration on the end of the White Australia policy. Joyce has also backed Hanson's calls for mass deportations, suggesting illegal immigrants could be targeted when they seek medical treatment. And Darren Hinch has been farewelled at a state funeral for the former journalist and senator. The so-called human headline died earlier this month after a long battle with poor health. He's been remembered as a journalist, campaigner and convict who was jailed for his convictions after speaking out in breach of court orders in multiple cases involving sex crimes and paedophilia. I'm Ruby Jones. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.